Well, it's Friday again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Friday afternoon program that's all about the people that like to take statements and write reports in insurance investigation and matters. Today, I'm very privileged to have as our guest to tell us all about what he does in his industry, Mr. Brett O'Brien, who is very busy, and I don't know how he found the time to be here today, but Brett's agreed to come on and share about his business and actually what he does as a loss adjuster. Welcome to the program, Brett. Could you tell us all about it, please, mate?
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the introduction, for having me, and good afternoon to all your viewers. Mike, just a little bit of background. I've been in the insurance and risk industry in Australia here, predominantly in Melbourne, but nationwide for the best part of 20 years or a little bit thereover. Worked as an underwriter myself for insurers and as an insurance broker. And a couple of years ago, I started my own consulting company called OBA Consulting. And we primarily work in livestock risk consulting, and we're sort of focusing on drought at the moment. But the consultancy has other components to it. But my role as a loss adjuster for, as I mentioned, just the best part of 2 decades now, I've been working in insurance claims. And the role of a loss adjuster is to look at claims in a little bit more detail. Generally work as a conduit between parties, you generally have, and I say generally, 3 parties to an insured loss, and they are the insurer who issue the policy, the client or the customer, and then you, generally speaking, unless the policy is direct, you'll have an insurance broker. Now, depending on the complexity of any loss, and in this case I might use a fire as an example, depending on the complexity, the insurer may appoint a loss adjuster to go out and assess the loss. And the part of the role there is to look at several factors, such as causation of the loss, the extent of the loss, what may be recoverable, what is not recoverable. And you generally act as a conduit between parties. Again, it's a tripartite relationship, and generally the loss adjuster will be the fourth. And there may be other parties on top of that, but if a loss adjuster has been appointed to an insured loss, they generally say the fourth party that is involved in the claim, and they will work through an investigative process, often with other investigators, or be the sole entity conducting investigations of a certain nature. But as I say, just to work around the elements of the claim, it'll generally involve preparing a report that then goes back to the insurer. You may make recommendations, you will fill out certain checklists. It just depends on the nature of the loss, but it really, at a sort of higher level, is to shed light what happened in terms of the claim, how the policy is either obligated or otherwise to respond to the loss, what the quantum of loss is in a dollar value, and then what recommendations as to what the next step should be. It's generally speaking, and you'll hear me use the word general today, as each case is on its merits. But generally speaking, it will then be down to the insurer to provide instructions or next steps in concert with the insurance broker and the insured. So that's the process. Happy to elaborate on any of those or go into it in a little bit more detail if that would be considered useful.
How did you get into it, Brett?
Well, it's a good question. As I touched on, I've been in the industry for 20 years, and like a lot of people in the industry that they ultimately end up in, I myself am 45 years old. I've been in insurance, as I mentioned, for just over 20 years. I was working in a hospitality, as a lot of us do as younger people, and I'd been in Europe, came back to Australia, and I thought, look, I probably am interested in something a little bit more white collar. And the body needed a bit of a break from lugging heavy kegs around and a lot of the manual labour that's involved in running a pub, particularly in the UK, where the size of the kegs are twice the size we have here. So I needed something that was, in my experience, white collar. And I basically took a role with an insurer, working over the phone, selling car insurance, and then that led me into insurance broking. And then from insurance broking, I did in-house corporate insurance management. And generally speaking, the more exposure you get to these claims, the more interesting you find it. And I guess for the average person, they see a claim as something that is a little bit to be wary of and at times quite problematic. But the more familiar you become with insurance and insurance policies, the more you see that the policies are only there to respond to these types of incidents. They're nothing to be really worried about. what is paramount is that in most cases that the insured is returned to a prior loss condition. So in answer to the question, Mike, I did fall into it, but I have found insurance and risk to be one of those industries that once you sort of wet your toes in it, you see that there's a lot of scope to do a lot of different things. And, if you find yourself a bit of a curious person, someone who has a knack for attention to detail or likes to look into things and can arrive at, qualitative, slightly meaningful conclusions, then it can be a great industry for anyone from any walk of life, really.
Thanks, Brett. Can you give us an example of a claim you had where you did your work and the client was really pleased with the outcome?
Yes, Mike. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of those, but I will use the case of a fire here in Melbourne, and this probably dates back to around about 2013 now. And as you will be aware, and your viewers will be aware, this individual manufactured fiberglass hulls for speedboats. Everyone knows what a flammable material fiberglass is. And the gentleman in question, I can say so without giving away any information that is sensitive, was approaching retirement, shall we say. So there was suspicion around the claim from the outset, i.e. of it. You will often find in instances of fire with flammable flamants that if it's something that's seen to be readily combustible, or that the person who is submitting the claim looks to have something to gain by the claim, that can raise suspicion. But in this case, there was nothing untoward whatsoever. The gentleman was unfortunate enough to lose both his factories. It was in Bayswater here, with, from memory, postcode 3153. And the gentleman was understandably aggrieved. He'd lost his life's work. There was no longer any family business to pass on to his children and his employees. And basically, I was able to work with him to establish a number of key elements, iron out any doubts, look at the cause of the fire, established that he had been following his husbandry / housekeeping / the maintaining of flammable goods, all those protocols. The firefighting equipment had been stamped as it should. Ultimately, the claim was paid to the full sum insured. It was declared a total loss, and it was then a matter of determining, okay, is it a matter of settlement or rebuild? Given the gentleman's age I'd referenced, he was looking at a settlement. But basically, he received the cheque that he had anticipated and hoped, and now that was just short of a decade ago. So the gentleman will be well and truly retired. But the insurer was fully satisfied that there were no suspicious circumstances. The broker in question was happy with the conduct all round, and you had a happy client. So when you have a situation like that, having said that, there was a considerable amount of work to arrive at that point. But when you do have all those parties that feel, and that really is what you were trying to achieve. I mean, you were trying to achieve an outcome that is fair and reasonable to all parties, and when you do so, it's satisfying.
Fantastic. That's a great example. Now, in the rural sector, can you give us an idea of what I don't know, a show bull might be worth?
That's a really good question. Thanks for asking it, because not too long ago, we're 5th of February now. I think it was late December up in Queensland at a well-known drought bull sale called Drought Master Bull Sale. A bull called Drought Master himself sold for an Australian record of 175,000. So this was a cracking 2-year-old bull. 175,000 Australian dollars set a record, and from my point of view, we work in terms of endeavouring to mitigate drought. So the name Drought Master, and for the bull Drought Master as well. So in answer to your question, you can expect a registered bull with a good breeding bloodlines and those sorts of things to easily open the bidding at $10,000. And more recently, I saw some Angus bull selling up in Albury for $50,000, $60,000. But in answer to your question, so the record was set late last year, November or December, at 175K.
Wow. All right. So racehorse, value of a racehorse?
That's a great question. And I won't go on for too long on this one, because how long's a piece of string? Some people say that those of the really good bloodlines, it can be unquantifiable. As the sire, it's hard to determine the sire's worth, and I know. But nothing out of the ordinary for a very good sire. in the racing industry, a lot of Group 1s to be insured for millions of dollars, several millions of dollars. So when you move from bovine, being my expertise in cattle, across to equine, the numbers jump exponentially and serious dollars involved.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, some of the things that are expensive in rural properties that people don't think about, things like fences.
Great call.
So it's an enormous amount of money to replace one of those if someone does have a bushfire or a fire on their property.
Absolutely. Fencing is, generally speaking, one of the things I've experienced that has been underinsured, because whilst these days you do have good fences that have got great equipment, it is still backbreaking labour to put fencing in with modern day equipment. The pine, the wire, fencing on farming is one of your greatest expenses, and the maintenance towards fencing can be enormous. I mean, people are accustomed in offices, we've got maintenance agreements in place with computers. Really good farms have maintenance contractors who really, I mean, if you've got a large property in either Northern Territory, Queensland, New South Wales, even Western Australia, you might have fences on site 24/7, a bit like large companies have auditors on site, like Ernst & Young on site 5 days a week. Large properties have fences on site, just constantly. So, and it's an easy one to be underinsured in because people underestimate the costs and basically just how challenging it is to keep a property adequately fenced.
Okay, how big a problem, and have you encountered it, is stock theft?
Stock theft, great question. I don't say that generically. Stock theft has been in the news in Australia in the last 12 months in particular. In Victoria here, in September, we had a large case of theft, and there have been more, probably don't quote me on this, but I have been keeping an eye on it. There have been more cases of stock theft. There was a task force formed, a police task force here in Victoria, and a little bit further up the eastern seaboard as well, specifically to deal with this issue. So it's becoming more and more of a problem. Historically, activists and just, I guess, people who have taken a liking to some cattle have been considered to be the potential culprits. But stock theft is becoming more and more of an issue. And again, that's expensive, but you've hit on quite a hot issue there, and I expect it to get even more attention in the next 12 months.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be the case. So what's the future hold for Brett?
Well, we'll be continuing on what we're doing. I mean, fortunately, we have La Nina here, but I'm sort of monitoring the news coming out of Queensland, and that is that there are a lot of pastoralists that are not necessarily getting the rain that we hope that La Nina would provide. So the future here for the business is we'll be doing more of the same, and we would like to see more done in the space of drought insurance in Australia, and we'll be certainly putting our 2 bits forward for that. And I'd like to hopefully do this year, with COVID permitting, a little bit more travel up the eastern seaboard. But in terms of the business, we'll be looking to press on with sort of more of the same. And Australia seemed to have a bit of an exigency into the need for these drought insurance products in the last sort of 2 years. And I would like to see that continue and be part of that.
Okay. All right. One last question. If you could have your industry association do something to assist your industry, what would that be that would be helpful? I know they do a great job, but if there was just something else they could do, what would that be?
Well, that's a good question, and one I'm going to just sort of mull over for a second before I respond to you. I think as an industry, and I can draw drought as an example, and also COVID, whilst we're all a bit sort of COVID fatigued, it's certainly not going anywhere. And I think as an industry, we need to be in more partnerships with the government, similar to the ARPC, which is the Australian Reinsurance Pool Corporation that responds to terrorism risks. So I think as a country, and really across the board, we're talking about overseas now as well, I think we would be benefited by, and if I use bushfires as an example, of course we've got Perth, we had Melbourne, but no corner of Australia seems to be immune from it, unfortunately. I think we need more partnerships at a government level, or more synergy between the industry and government to be sort of working on these as collectives. And that is, I would like to clarify, that's no criticism of any entity to date, but more collaboration between the industry and government to address large-scale risks.
That's fantastic, Brett. I've taken up all the time that I promised I'd keep you for. You've given us some great insights and really good value. I really thank you for coming on today, and I hope you'll be able to come back to us in the future and share some of your experience in loss adjusting again.
Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Brett. So, there's a fire investigator wanted in Brisbane and in Melbourne by the same company. So if you have experience in general insurance arson investigations for homes, businesses or vehicles, they're chasing you. So you can see that, and you can see all these jobs on our Facebook job vacancies page, which is here. Just Google Australian Private Investigator Corporate and Government Investigation Jobs, where we put all the jobs up that have come up in the week, 30% of them, so you can research your new career in investigation, government investigations, loss adjusting, workplace health and safety, or whatever it is. And you might think, oh, well, I'm just going to do investigations and I'm just going to do this or that. But these jobs, they give you an insight in what you can actually do. So that one was for a fire investigation. This one's for licensed private investigators, factual and surveillance in Victoria at MJ Kerrigan. So that's on our website. The contact details for their website's there, and you can ring up Jimmy and ask him if you can have a job interview. So it was advertised 2 days ago on Seek. This job is for a forensic accountant investigator for the Law Society of New South Wales. So for those lawyers that are ripping off their I don't know, whatever they're doing in relation to deposits paid for work and that sort of thing. You have to be an accountant for that one, but it's not unusual for us to have accountants in our investigation courses. So that's a job for those people who are qualified in that. Doesn't mean you have to be an accountant for every investigator. That's just that position. Over here, we have an Executive Director of Intelligence in multiple roles all around Australia. You can see that on our website. So if you have a government investigation qualification, there's that vacancy and more. Internal dispute resolution officer, and this is what I was just alluding to when we say you might be thinking you're going to be an investigator, but you might not know what you're going to do. Now, one of the major investigation roles is as an internal dispute resolution officer. That's what investigators do. There's a complaint about the internal process, policy and procedure and how the matters were handled, and that's what the internal dispute resolution officer looks at. Never the most popular person in the organisation. A fire investigator again. This one, we have an assistant investigator for the New South Wales Department of Premier and Cabinet, and they're offering $79,600 for you to do that job. So with that one, it's a government investigator position. So your minimum qualification there is going to be a certificate for in government investigation, which you'll need for that job. That's what they require, an investigator for corporate investigative services in Melbourne. So this is for a licensed factual investigator in Victoria. You'll be doing general insurance work and you'll be conducting investigations and interviews and writing reports. That's what we're about here on this program. So that's a job vacancy that's down there with CIS in Melbourne. For those of you that like to get on Bark and have a look at Bark, Bark is something that promotes investigators. They get on investigation websites and they send things like this out to every investigation agency. Naturally, if you're going to look for a private investigator, you always jump on Bark. So they've got one there for Ashley. So that happens. It's another communication method. It's another touch point for investigators. So certainly have a look at that one as well. So that's our investigations for this week. Now we have our question of the week, and here it is.
Hi Mike, it's Renee Shortino here from Victoria. Is it illegal to tape a phone conversation?
What a great question from Renee. Wow, if you jump over in the comments section, you will see a link go up there now, and that link will take you to the Australian Security Academy's YouTube site, where Pat Flynn will answer Renee's question for every state and territory in Australia. So Renee, that's a brilliant question. If I answer that here in the 9 minutes I've got left, it's going to take me 2 hours to answer that question. Pat, who you are so familiar with after your virtual investigation conference this week, where you saw Pat in action with the other instructors, and you're looking forward to that happening on the 10th and 11th of February again, I know. But if you jump on that link that's over in the chat now, Renee, or later on tonight when your kids are in bed, have a look at it, and that will answer your question how you can actually do that, or if it is legal to do that in the state or territory where you live. Really good question there, Renee. Thanks for sending that in. I'm sending 2 coffee cups your way. Now, we also have Laura's question of the week. This is where the person didn't videotape it and they don't get a coffee mug. But let's see what Laura's been asked.
Hi Mike, it's Laura here again for question of the week. This week's question is from Sarah, and Sarah asks, can I get my private investigator's license with a certificate 4 in government investigation? Thanks, Mike.
Great question, Laura. And Sarah, that's one of my most commonly asked questions. Had you videotaped that and sent it to me, I would give you a coffee mug for that. But you can't get a private investigator's license in any state or territory where they are required, and they're only not required in Canberra, the ACT, with a certificate 4 in government investigation. It won't happen. They are 2 completely different industries. To get a private investigator's license, you today must have a CPP 30619 Certificate 3 in Investigative Services, and you use that in your application process to become a private investigator. Now, a private investigator will do government investigation work. Naturally, they do work cover claims, TAC claims. In Tasmania, they do MAIB claims and work cover claims. In New South Wales, they do green slip claims. So they do government work, but it's not required they have a certificate 4 in government investigation in all circumstances. Only when it's for Comcare or in special blitzes by Centrelink are they required to have that. So no, you can't get a private investigator license with a certificate 4 in government investigation, a diploma of government investigation, or a degree in economics. You have to have a certificate 3 in investigative services. As a guide, if the Chief Commissioner of Police leaves the police today and they want to become a private investigator, she has to go and get the certificate 3 in investigative services to apply for that private investigator's license. That's how the system works. It's universal throughout Australia. So keep that in mind. But it's a good question. It's a really, really fair question, and I'm really pleased that you asked that one. Around the country this week in industry associations, there hasn't been anything really happening. I think they're a little bit nervous about what's going on with COVID-19. So no one's really committing to any early year investigation industry association meetings. And being updated on things like that, there's no real emails coming through. Now, I understand that because, look, nobody really knows. If they appoint a meeting to have a group of 40 people together in a closed room in Box Hill in Melbourne in a month's time, it could be cancelled at last minute. They've still got to pay for the venue. Who knows what might happen? So my advice to them all is you do what we do here in the Australian Security Academy and take everything virtual and live into that investigator's own office. That's what we're doing here. So it works. The technology's available. It's very inexpensive. And as long as you get the enrolment right, not like I did this week, everything will go fine. So we've spoken about loss adjusting. We've spoken about our job of the week. Other news this week, we had Brett before on loss adjusting. The new loss adjusting qualification has now come out. So the 2020 version of that, put together by PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the Australian Security Academy's biggest clients, PricewaterhouseCoopers, along with the Deloitte and all the others. So certainly they'd be interested in that. They've written that qualification. It's going to be available from next week onwards, I believe. So anyone looking for that qualification who has the old one and needs to update for their industry association purposes will be able to do that now. The Certificate 3 in Mercantile Agent has also been updated, and the Diploma of General Insurance, which is one of our more popular programs here with the insurance companies at the Australian Security Academy, that's been updated too. So there's been quite a few updates in relation to what PricewaterhouseCoopers is in charge of for nationally recognised qualifications. In other news this week, the Australian Security Academy held this week its first virtual investigation conference to support Certificate 3 in Investigative Services and Certificate 4 in Government Investigation. And 5 instructors went through the first 2 days of that program, and some of the training included open source intelligence, time and event lines, cross-cultural issues in investigations and using interpreters, taking statements, and a whole range of other regulatory compliance presentations. We also did workshops on how to get work as a licensed private investigator, and assessments in relation to Certificate 4 in Government Investigation and Certificate 3 in Investigative Services were done separately to support the people studying. The really important thing you've got to keep in mind now is part 2 of that program is going to be available coming up on February the 10th and 11th. So that's when part 2 is coming up. So if you are an enrolled Australian Security Academy student, you're invited to that program on February the 10th and 11th. You'll see presentations that you'll be able to interact with your trainer with and ask questions in real time. They will be answered by the trainer when you ask them. And then in the afternoons, instead of passive listening, you'll be able to take part further in some of our workshops in relation to assessments or getting a job or cross-cultural communication, using interpreters or anything like that investigators, private, government or corporate do. So keep that in mind. We had a very successful 2 days. The feedback was amazing on it, and we're really looking forward to the 10th and the 11th. This is a 6-day program. It is quite a bit of learning. It supports the Moodle resources that you're using to study and do your assessments as a licensed PI. The other one that was important that came out recently that people were asking about is pain and suffering. So pain and suffering awards, you can look this up and you can see these awards done by WorkSafe Victoria. People over time, what they got paid for pain and suffering in relation to their claim. Now there's some pretty large amounts on the screen there in front of you. I'm not going to agonisingly go through it and parrot back what's obvious. So certainly if you're looking at, widening your understanding of what's going on, you can Google this sort of thing yourself. Get on the work cover sites and look around. I can't recommend higher that you actually go out and you take your stuff to the next level, because when you get into a job interview or something like that, you don't have to start mentioning this sort of thing, but having a background understanding of some of these things, that's what you can talk to loss adjusters about in relation to, what they did with that, or investigators or something like that, and you learn in that conversation. And that's why we have a conference where you can actually interact, go into actual sessions face to face with myself, Pat Flynn, the other instructors, and you're there, they're in your home office talking to you in real time. Excuse me. That is amazing technology. So look, we've had a flat out week here at the Australian Security Academy. I'm so far behind. I've got 7 students to enrol. I've got a drone course to design for the RSPCA. We've got some new qualifications to write. My weekend's gone already, so I'm going to be catching up from my week in Tasmania and also our conference week. But it's been a very busy week. It's really been a great week. As I just said, the Australian Security Academy will be conducting its 3rd drone program for the RSPCA, and this one's in Victoria, and this will take our total in-kind support to the RSPCA around Australia to $1,200,000 worth of training that we have provided to the RSPCA for free. It was interesting to hear Brett earlier say about activists and people raiding farms. and stealing stock or that sort of thing. They do that. One of the most shameful things that I've encountered in investigation training and regulatory compliance training throughout Australia is the RSPCA, when they do a course in a room in a hotel or a conference centre, they can't put a sign up outside because there's crazies and nutters that don't like the RSPCA because they've been caught out by the RSPCA and they're set on revenge and they've got hit lists and they're psychos and all this sort of thing. So they can't put a sign up saying the RSPCA conference is in room 6 at level 14 because it just attracts those crazy people. So that's really a shame that in our society you have to do that. But again, the solution to that sort of thing is we can now do it virtually with the RSPCA studying at their own office space where they work throughout the country. So we have eliminated now that problem. Recently, I had one of my students receive threats from a person who thought he owned the investigation industry in Australia. They were implied threats. And I thought, that's just not right. We can't have that sort of thing happening. So now I'm going to design a safe place for ladies in Australia to communicate in a safe place without having to go on Facebook and become a target to psychos. So we'll have that instituted before the end of this year. It'll be Ladies in Investigation, but that again will be through our virtual conference. And I'm really pleased that we now have the capacity to do that and allow those people cost-free to have a meeting, have a conversation, get support, find out stuff without having to go on Facebook like a magnet and have idiot head come and be a dick. So that is a really great thing that's been enabled by our capacity to do virtual conferences. So I'm really pleased with that. Looking forward to starting it. I really can't wait. So people, that is the end of this week's news in investigations. Congratulations, Renee. Your coffee mugs will be coming out next week. Sarah, you should have videotaped that and sent that in.
Hi Mark, it's Laura here again for question of the week. This week's question is from Sarah, and Sarah asks, can I get my private investigator's license with a certificate 4 in government investigation? Thanks.
Thanks, Laura. Well, Sarah, we've answered that question, and it's a good question. That was a really good question. But people, that's the end of our program for the week. Got to get back to work. There's assessments to mark, drones to fly, statements to be taking. I've got to get out of here. Where's my Koreans? I've got to end with them. Here they are.
작전 종료. 전원 복귀할 것.
Yes, at the end of the week, every investigation agency in Australia and the world says, all units, please return to base. That movie's called Cold Eyes. It's a really great movie. You've got to see it. So people ask me, what are the features and benefits of those coffee mugs? Well, they're idiot-proof, and here is an idea of what they're like. Unstoppable coffee mug. 8-point fathoms. No batteries required. Radar, sonar, invisible. Great thing. See you next week.